The Tribal Health and Human Services Department of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes is proud to present Good Medicine, a program dedicated to the wellness of the Flathead Nation. The mission is summarized quite simply: a healthier people, a stronger nation. We'll strive to make Good Medicine a reliable source of ideas and information about health issues so that everyone can make informed decisions about their own lifestyle and health care. You'll meet health professionals, tribal government and spiritual leaders, and interesting people from the tribal community discussing important health issues that profoundly affect us all.
Good afternoon or good morning. This is Roxanne Colman-Herek, your host of Good Medicine. Today we're going to be talking about some issues that impact our community and not in such a positive way. We have two guests on the program today. We have Wade Nash, who's the police chief of the Polson Police Department, and Craige Couture, the chief of police for our tribal law and order department. So we're going to open this up with the problem with meth and other drugs on the community is that it's a growing concern. How do you see where we are as compared to where we were in the 60s? You know, back in the 60s, people were between 20 and 35 doing drugs. It's like today, it seems like the trend might be changing a little bit.
Well, for one, I wasn't alive in the 60s, but
you mentioned that, and that was really quite hard to believe.
But I do know a little history about the 60s era. So, you know, it just seems like the drugs are getting a lot more potent. The quality is increasing, and the age of use is lowering. And things, there's a bad reaction when that happens, is because, one, when you're younger, you don't have the mental capability of making logical decisions. So you have a younger age of users that are using drugs, making poor decisions, and then the violence seems to increase after that.
So when you talk about earlier age, what are we talking about?
I've seen meth use down to the age of 11. You know, typically in the 60s, I think you could have said that reasonably honest with marijuana. But when you look at the age of 11 years old, the mentality, I mean, that's a fourth grader, fifth grader, and you're using a drug, methamphetamine, that's bad, you know. It seems like society is accepting that a lot more, and we're not fighting back like we should be.
We're talking about illegal drugs now, but do you feel, both of you, that there's a concern with the prescription drugs that are out there? What are you seeing with that?
Yeah, by all means, prescription drugs. Overdose, typical are overdoses. I talked with the Montana Board of Vital Statistics, and that's all they do is concentrate on statistics throughout the state. And I posed them the question of how many deaths involving prescription drugs do we have versus fatality car crashes just in our area? And the guy's like, wow, that's a pretty good question. We've never looked at that before, but let's look at it. So he took a look at it and found out that we have more overdose deaths because of prescription drugs here than we do fatality car crashes. And if you look at that, if you look at all the money that is spent on cleaning up the highways, on the money that goes for extra DUI patrols and stuff for alcohol, if we took half of that amount of money and put that towards narcotics and education, we could probably cut down on a lot more deaths, not just on our roadways, because a lot of our roadway traffic fatalities are also drug related. So what we're seeing is not only do we have just overdose fatalities, we have fatality crashes that are drug related on our reservation and roadways. Now when you look at some of the more recent overdose deaths we've had, and one of them has to do with a fentanyl overdose. And I think people, the general public, need to know, with a fentanyl overdose, it's a completely 100% synthetic drug. And the way it's made is the way it's typically given is administered is it's a patch, and it's a time-release patch. They put it on, and it absorbs through the skin. Well, then people start figuring out, well, if it absorbs through the skin, I'm going to maybe eat some of it. Well, then they try that and get pretty high. Then they think, well, I'm going to smoke it. When they smoke it, they die, and it's fairly quick. A lot of times, I know one from a few years back, the actual death occurred before, from what they could show. As soon as it went into the lungs, they're not even 100% positive if the person was able to exhale before the death. So fentanyl, while it gets in the system, it just shuts them down that quick.
What are some of the other drugs that you're seeing out there besides fentanyl, meth, crack, heroin?
Heroin, oxys,
Cocaine.
psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA, or they call it Molly, which is basically ecstasy. Seeing that quite often, and of course a lot of marijuana, a lot of alcohol abuse.
What's the attraction? I mean, I just really can't get what the attraction is with these, because, you know, we talked about this in the last show you was on with me, and sometimes, I think, and especially with the younger kids, there's this sense of invincibility. I can do this one time. Or if you tell them not to do it one time, that's almost like a challenge to do it twice, just to show you. It's like today there seems to be a little bit of rebellion in the air with our youth. I don't know if it's always been like that, but it seems to me like today, when you have this mix, you have the alcohol, you have the drugs, you have the violence, all of these things together, it seems like a pretty deadly recipe that doesn't seem like it would be that attractive to be involved with.
I think when you look at it from a perspective of how society's changing in the last, let's say from the 60s to today, I think the bigger problem is I believe that youth want to feel wanted, want to feel involved in something. I know that when I was growing up, my mom never worked, my dad went out and worked. I had a place that I knew was safe and that I could go to. I think in today's society, it's changing so rapidly that you're not getting that quality home life, morals, support, belief. So these kids are searching out ways to feel like they're wanted. Whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, they're searching out in areas where they feel like they're welcome. Some of that increase is totally involved in making decisions at parties. I want to feel important. I want to feel like I'm involved in something. So the use, I think, is increasing at a younger age because they don't have that support system at home.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think there's a lot of kids out there that are basically raising themselves, and that's kind of sad and an unfortunate truth.
Yeah. I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it as far as the breakdown of the American family. And when you look at the family unit, it takes a family to raise a child. You can't just have, and nothing against single parents that are out there trying to work and hard to raise children, but the reason that I learned how to work and learned how to do the things that I know how to do as an adult and been successful is because my father and mother were there to show me those things. I had a father who could teach me the things, to teach me how to work. And like Wade said, my mom pretty much stayed home as a housewife. And then as we got older and were in high school, then she started to work. But my parents were always there for us. I mean, they were always there, and that role model is so important. So when you have kids that don't have a positive role model, they look for any role model. And if it's a drug dealer, if it's partying, if it's something of that nature, that's where they're going to go.
Sad. I mean, it really is sad.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can see it in the schools nowadays, just lack of respect. Not only for law enforcement, but for teachers. I mean, how often do you see a kid holding the door open for somebody that's elderly at the store? You don't see it anymore. So it's kind of, it truly is sad. I mean, and I don't know how you curb that and fix that problem. I mean, Craig and I are in the chiefs of police positions, and we deal with what we have today. If we had a solution to gain that respect and values back into home life, I mean, the opportunity there just is kind of dwindling, and there is no answer for it, and that's what's so frustrating, because you can personally see it when you go out in our communities today. The lack of respect, lack of values, and I don't think people intentionally do it. They're just trying to survive. But this society is so fast-paced nowadays that it takes the value, the wholesome lifestyle away. And it takes
is fast-moving today.
Unbelievable. You look at technology, you look at how we do our jobs today compared to 10 years ago.
Well, we're going to look at technology in the next program. We're going to bring in another officer and talk about how technology is working or maybe not working quite so well, too.
Right.
So we know that this is a growing problem and an increasing concern for our entire community, and I'm sure surrounding communities and probably beyond that. What are some of the things that we can do to help address this? If our youth is between, 15 and 20 now, so it's a younger age, how do you intervene? How do you educate?
I think each one of us plays a part in that, and just the people here in this room, if we can lead by example, if we can say thank you to people, if we can be the ones opening the doors and role modeling that way, and we can pass it on to our children, that's a start. But for the people that are watching in the viewing audience, if they do the same thing and you show the kindness and the true love that you should have for your fellow man, that will change. It can slowly change. And I think that families that are out there, there's a lot of people out there who just need a helping hand. That's really all they need. Maybe they're down on their luck, maybe a family member died, and maybe it's a single parent that just needs that help. Be there for that person. Don't be afraid to help somebody out. I think in society all too often we've lost track of who our neighbors are as well. I mean, I know my neighbors really well, and I visit with them and help them out and do things of that nature. A lot of people don't do that anymore.
And they're afraid to know their neighbors.
But you should know them. I actually had a person who's a recovered drug addict tell me, you want to know who your neighbors are, even if they're the ones you think who are going to rip you off, because you want to know who it is.
Right.
So, I mean, knowing your neighbors is a positive thing either way.
So when we talk about violence and we talk about these drugs, and it's like there's always a positive side of this, and I think our community is really starting to come together. We've known that this is a problem for some time now, and I think there's groups that are meeting, even as we're having this meeting, trying to find ways to address it in a humane way. You know, they had the meth project back in the
mid-2000s.
2000.
Yeah.
When that was up and going, I don't know how long that was in movement. Was that like 2 years?
I think it's still a portion of it still exists today.
But you know, there were some positive changes that came out of that meth project, and what it did is really bring meth out in the open. We should be talking about this.
It brings reality. And I think a lot of times people don't understand what the reality of meth use is. Meth is a drug that doesn't just affect the poor. It doesn't affect the weak, the strong. It affects everybody. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. It doesn't matter the classification, whether you're a professional or a laborer. Each and every one of our audience that's probably watching today can say at some point in their life they were affected by somebody that they either knew, they loved, or a family member. We can almost, I know Craig and I did this when we were on the task force, we'd have everybody stand up and we'd go one by one, and there was maybe one person still standing at the end of that hadn't been affected by drugs. Like I said, whether it was your loved one or a victim. You can pretty much make an audience of about 100 people sit down by answering 5 questions if they've been affected by somebody either using drugs or a victim of a drug. And so it's the totality of it all as a community that stands together. My community that I serve in Polson, very, very supportive in drugs. But I think people don't understand the concept of drugs. There's a lot to it. The crime, rehabilitation, the cost. For us, manpower, and when the economy and the funds tighten, what's the one thing that everybody wants to cut is a drug task force, because they don't look at the big picture. They look at the individual status of it. The other challenges that we have is once we do have a successful drug investigation and we do arrest people and charge them, then we have challenges with the crime lab. Currently right now, and I think people don't quite understand that, is if we do an incident where we make arrests and charge people. Oftentimes those charges are dismissed without prejudice, and what that means is we're required to send those product, the drugs, to a state crime lab where it has to be identified scientifically by the name. Yes, it is 100% without a doubt methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, whatever. And then they would send that back to our local court system. At that time, then we would charge those people. What people don't realize, that's almost a year wait period to get those back. So what we have is we have multiple offenders repeating multiple times during that. And that's very frustrating. I talked to my narcotics agent just yesterday. He started last April, I think, in 2013. He just started getting the crime lab
my guy's
results
the
back.
same thing.
That's 12 months behind. And that makes it tough for us.
Because someone can have multiple, like Wade said, multiple cases against them, which makes them a persistent felony offender before that happens. I was talking to some gals from the drug work group yesterday, and they wanted me to give them a daily update on what we're seeing as far as drug cases every day. And so I had to break it down not only by if it's an actual distribution case or a possession case, but read each individual report and see if it involved drugs. So just from last night at 5 o'clock until this morning at 5 o'clock, there were 13 drug cases. 13, just in one night. I don't know what they had. I would venture a guess your guys' cases that you handled, the two we talked about, were drug related.
Yeah.
So you could venture a guess between his department, my department, Lake County, Highway Patrol, Ronan City, and St. Ignatius. Probably 80 to 90% of all of our calls are drug related at this point. And some of them go unchecked because not always do we know it's drug related until after the fact. So when the reports are written, it may be just to look like a public intoxication. Well, then when you get your results back from the crime lab, no, it is actually a drug charge.
There was some talk earlier about people being stopped randomly and checked. Is that something that...
No, not randomly. I think that...
or probable cause?
What we were looking at, and it's something that we've proposed at the drug work group, is to see if the tribe would be willing to go with under the influence of drugs in public. And what that would be is if you are suspected of being under the influence of drugs, that would be a misdemeanor crime with certain penalties attached to that. When I worked in Idaho, we used that drug law, and it actually worked fairly well because what it does is it gives the person the opportunity with a first offense to seek rehabilitation. So there's no jail time involved. It's basically you get caught, you may spend that first day in jail, get sentenced, but you have to go and seek out rehabilitation.
Is that individually, or is that something the court mandates?
The court will mandate it, and it's all within the code. If you do that with people, it actually helps us here as law enforcement to make more cases as well. So that's something that, because we get calls all the time where it's like at the casinos or at a grocery store or something saying, well, this person's intoxicated, they're high on drugs, come arrest them. Well, at this point, it's not against the law. So there's really not much we can do until they make it and step into that criminal realm.
It's got to be kind of scary when you talk about the violence and these drugs, that combination. Then you add, Montana's one of the highest gun states. We like our guns.
Proactive.
I like my gun too. I like my guns. But so that's got to be pretty dangerous when you go out there and...
Well, we know that most every time you go to a call here in Montana, there's a gun involved because everyone has guns. But what I look at it is the people here who actually have guns and use guns know how to use them. Mm-hmm. They use them for hunting. They use them to provide for their families. They use them for safety of the home. Now, if you look at Chicago as an example of how gun laws don't work, they have some of the most stringent gun laws in the U.S., but yet they have the highest gun fatalities of anywhere. You can't buy a handgun, I believe, in Chicago, but yet they have more crimes with handguns than anywhere else. They have some of the strictest laws, but it's not working. So I think it's because we live in a rural society, whereas we've been raised and lived here in the country, we've learned that guns are a tool. It's no different than if we go get firewood, you need an axe and a splitting maul. A gun's the same thing here. It's part of the tools that we use to survive. That's the difference between us and I think in some of the other places with the gun violence.
So a few years ago, we had meth labs. It seemed like there was a meth lab just about every 3 miles out in the...
I hated that. I know you hated it too.
I did hate it.
So has What's changed? Has anything changed since meth lab days?
The abuse is still there,
Yeah.
without a doubt. We don't see the meth labs like we used to, which is great. I hope I never see another one the rest of my life.
Yeah.
They're very volatile, they're very dangerous, the property damage is extreme. The drug use is probably more so than back in the meth lab era. It really is. I think we're seeing more of it brought in than any other time we've ever seen.
Are we talking about prescription drugs, or is this?
Meth labs and prescription drugs, or methamphetamine and prescription drugs tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You know, I was reading somewhere, and I can't really remember where right now, but where some of the derivatives of meth are actually in prescription medications.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of like the pseudoephedrine and things of that nature, and there's other things they use. The chemical process behind making some of the drugs are really similar when you go to synthesize the drug. And I've had numerous trainings in that, and actually I think the chemistry portion is something I really enjoyed. But I mean, done in a controlled environment. I mean, methamphetamine used to be a prescription drug. It used to be prescribed in the United States. And then it was used in dietary pills and others, and then it started to be addictive, and then they kind of took it off of the shelves. So it's been around, it's been through the process, but when you make something in your backyard like that, or in your basement or wherever, you're cutting corners, and you're leaving a lot of the toxins in it. Recently, the Tribal Housing Authority, along with the Tribal Lands Department, when they have an eviction of a house, they make it mandatory, and I think even as people are living there, they go and swab the insides of the house if they believe there's drug use. And they've been finding high levels of methamphetamine use just by swabbing the walls. And it's not meth labs. It's they're smoking meth so constant in the house that when they swab a wall, it's showing positive for methamphetamine. That's an extreme amount in the walls. And I don't know, as far as any studies or anything of that nature that have been done, to see what kind of toxicity lies within a home that's in. So housing's really taking the lead in finding ways to clean that house and make sure it's safe for people to live, and they've done a great job that way.
Well, to throw it on top of that is you think about people smoking meth in their house. How often are children in their house
Yeah.
when they're smoking it? You know, back in the 60s, they'd smoke a joint. Well, there were some kids that were probably affected by that, but now you're throwing meth as a common drug use, and then throw children on top of that. It's very challenging, and it's sad. I haven't directly talked to the hospitals, but they're saying that almost 8 out of 10 babies that are delivered in our local area are testing positive for methamphetamine or some type of drug.
8 out of 10?
Yeah. And that's just an alarming number to me.
What happens when that many babies are born meth addicted?
I think, well, obviously they're going to get Department of Family Services involved.
It would seem like that number would be...
It seemed rather high. I was doing a presentation up in Polson, and there was some hospital staff, and they had said they searched out those numbers, and that was what they were running in our local area, which it was mind-boggling to me. Completely alarming, you know. But it directly relates back to our profession, because obviously, you know, people aren't, I don't want to say being responsible when they're using drugs, but they're only thinking about themselves.
Well, I think
Pretty
when you're
selfish.
using drugs, you're not being responsible.
Yeah.
I think it would be
Selfish.
fair to say
Yeah,
that.
it's very selfish, you know, and it's
It's
sad.
not good judgment. I mean, when you're under the influence of any drug, I think it's very safe to say that you're not thinking responsibly. The
Yeah.
judgment part of the brain is not functioning properly.
Well, and then you throw your children involved in it, and they're not getting the adequate food, you know, the water, the healthy environment. It kind of goes back to our conversation a little bit ago about that home style of life that's taken away. And if a kid is raised in that environment, what kind of example is he learning from?
Well, what kind of help is there for, let's say, our younger generation, our younger adolescents who are engaged in this? Now, this is a statistic I found out recently, that adolescent brain isn't fully formed to make good judgment decisions until they're 25. So they're well under that 25-year mark. How do we reach out to the people who are making this choice and they're really not equipped to deal with all the ramifications that go along with that one choice, and how highly addictive, how highly volatile it is? How do you reach this
You know, we do a lot of presentations. I know Craig and I used to do a lot of them when we were on the drug task force. And I think people need to understand this as well. You know, when we sit here and talk today, it sounds horrible. You know, it sounds, yeah, we're losing the battle. But I think what people need to realize is in 2005, the only law enforcement agency in Lake County that actually had a drug task force member that was investigating narcotics was Craig's office, the Tribal Police Department, because of funding. When I became chief in 2012, Craig and I sat down and we believed together that this is something that we have to address. We don't have the funding in our departments to do this. We made changes in our departments to adjust to allow us to have investigators to investigate narcotics 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there is some positive coming out of this, and it's cooperation amongst us, as well as the sheriff's office. You know, once Craig and I got it going, they jumped aboard, and now it's a very successful team. But what people don't realize is from 2005 up until 2013, you still had this problem, but it wasn't being enforced as strictly as it is now. I can honestly say that in 1 year, we've submitted over 100 felony cases that our guys have done. 27 search warrants just in Polson, let alone seizing roughly right around, my guy alone was $72,000. So we're fighting back. And I don't think people realize that time span from 2005 to 2013, we didn't have the resources and the understanding to address it. It was being ignored, out of sight, out of mind. And that was the mentality of law enforcement, kind of, because we were strapped.
And we knew there's no way you could not deal with it, so we kept the guy there no matter what, we kept the guy on.
Yeah, and I commend Craig to be able to do that. But you got my belief, and I know Craig's belief's the same thing, is when you're investigating drugs, you're not only investigating drugs, you're investigating sexual assaults, you're investigating thefts, you're investigating all these other crimes that are related to drugs somehow, because most of these people that use drugs in our local area, they don't have a job like we do. They go out and steal, or they go out and scam somebody. Well, that commits another crime, and the reason they're doing that is to support their habit.
I think to reach the kids that are making that bad decision at the age of 12, 13, and 14 and whatnot, I think we need to concentrate on them, and we need to reach younger children as well. I think the family needs to be built back up and supported, and once we can get to that point, I think we'll see a lot of change.
I wish we didn't have to wrap this up. I could just go on and talk about this forever, but we're right at the end of our mark here. I really appreciate you coming in to talk to us about this. This was a lot of information, a lot of things I didn't know. Craig, thank you for coming in.
You're welcome.
We got to start someplace. Why not now?
Good Medicine is your program. We hope you watch this and subsequent programs to stay informed about your health care. And we'd like to hear from you about how we're doing. Please direct any comments or suggestions you have to us. You can reach us at